Welcome back to Secrets in the Shadows, the channel where we dive deep into the most chilling and heartbreaking true crime stories. Before we begin, I want to warn you that the details of today's case are graphic and disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Liking this video doesn't mean we support the crime or its perpetrator in any way. It's simply a way to support our work with the story. Now, let's get into this tragic case. In a quiet neighborhood in Jacksonville, Florida, 8-year-old Maddie Clifton was playing outside on the afternoon of November 3rd, 1998. She was a typical, happy young girl, excited to play with her friends. But as the day went on, Maddie never returned home. Her parents, Steve and Sheila Clifton, grew increasingly concerned and began searching the streets for their daughter. The entire neighborhood soon joined the search. Flyers were posted, doors were knocked on, and neighbors rallied together, hoping to find Maddie safe. But as the days passed, with no sign of her, the search turned into a nightmare. Joshua Phillips, a seemingly ordinary 14-year-old boy, was well liked in his neighborhood. He was known for helping out around his community, often playing baseball with other kids, and even joining in the search efforts after 8-year-old Maddie Clifton went missing. He was the last person anyone would have suspected of being involved in the girl's disappearance. But beneath this seemingly normal exterior, there was a dark and violent side to Joshua that would soon be revealed. On November 3rd, 1998, Maddie Clifton disappeared from her neighborhood, sparking a widespread search. Her family, friends, and even Joshua Phillips were desperate to find her. Joshua lived just a few houses down from the Cliftons, so he was part of the search team, going door to door and helping the family search for Maddie. But what no one knew was that Joshua wasn't just helping to find her. He knew exactly where she was, and he had already hidden her body. What had begun as an innocent afternoon of playing baseball with Maddie quickly turned into something far more sinister. Joshua invited Maddie over to play, and at some point during their game, a baseball accidentally struck Maddie in the eye, injuring her. Joshua, frightened and unable to handle the consequences of the accident, panicked. Instead of seeking help, Joshua grabbed a baseball bat and struck Maddie in the head, knocking her unconscious. But that wasn't the end of it. In a cold and calculated manner, Joshua continued to attack Maddie, stabbing her 3 times in the head and neck with a knife to ensure she wouldn't survive. But Maddie wasn't dead yet, so Joshua, with a chilling lack of remorse, shoved her under his waterbed to hide her body. It wasn't just an act of panic. Joshua's actions were premeditated. He went to great lengths to cover up the crime, trying to hide the evidence. He even went as far as placing air fresheners around his room in an attempt to mask the smell of decomposition. It was as though he had already thought through every step of how to avoid getting caught, turning a tragic accident into a brutal, deliberate murder. The way Joshua's mind worked that day would later be revealed through interviews and his confession. He admitted to stabbing Maddie 9 more times after she had already died in an apparent attempt to make sure she was really gone. His actions were methodical, cold, and chilling. Joshua's motives remained unclear. Some speculated that it was an act of fear and panic after an accident, but others pointed to a deeper, more disturbing issue of violence that had been brewing inside him. Joshua had a history of troubling behavior, though nothing outwardly suggested that he was capable of such a horrific act. In fact, he had been somewhat of a quiet and shy teenager, showing little outward signs of the anger or aggression that he ultimately unleashed on Maddie. Joshua's upbringing had been described as relatively normal, though some later speculated that there may have been deeper psychological or emotional issues at play that led him to commit the crime. As the investigation unfolded, it was revealed that Joshua had spent hours with Maddie's body hidden under his bed, as her family and friends continued to search desperately for her. The community was unaware of the true horror that was unfolding just a few doors down from them. Even when Joshua's mother noticed a strange smell coming from his room, Joshua had an excuse ready. But when his waterbed started to leak, his mother, in the process of cleaning his room, made the horrifying discovery of Maddie's body. Joshua's attempts to cover up the crime ultimately failed, but the chilling reality of his actions had already been set in motion. The police quickly arrested Joshua Phillips, and his arrest shocked the community. The boy who had been helping to search for Maddie was now the person who had taken her life. Joshua's arrest sent shockwaves through the community. How could someone so familiar, someone who had helped search for Maddie, be responsible for such a brutal crime? The truth was almost too terrible to believe. Joshua Phillips was charged with first-degree murder. His trial revealed a deeply troubled teenager who had been hiding his violent tendencies. Despite his normal outward appearance, Joshua had a history of behavioral issues, and his actions on that fateful day were not just a result of panic, but cold, calculated violence. In 1999, Joshua was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His sentence, though a small measure of justice, could never heal the pain caused to Maddie's family. They would forever be haunted by the loss of their daughter in such a horrific way. The case of Maddie Clifton is one of the most tragic and chilling stories in Jacksonville's history. It left a scar on the community that would never fade. A young girl with a bright future was taken from her family, her life stolen in a horrific act of violence. For the Clifton family, the pain of losing their daughter in such a brutal way will never go away. Maddie's parents, Steve and Sheila, have spoken out over the years to keep her memory alive, but the grief of her loss remains with them. Joshua Phillips may have tried to hide his crime, but the truth always comes to light. He will spend the rest of his life in prison, but nothing will ever undo the damage he caused. Maddie's story is a haunting reminder of how darkness can lurk behind closed doors, even in the most familiar of places. During his trial, which took place in 1999, the prosecution argued that Joshua had acted with premeditation, showing clear intent to kill. Despite his young age, the state believed he should be tried as an adult due to the severity of the crime. Joshua's defense team, however, tried to argue that the murder was not premeditated, but instead occurred in a moment of panic. They suggested that he hadn't intended to kill Maddie, but had acted out of fear and desperation after accidentally injuring her. They also highlighted his age, emphasizing that he was just 14 years old and may not have fully understood the consequences of his actions. Despite the defense's arguments, the jury found Joshua Phillips guilty of first-degree murder. The evidence was overwhelming, and Joshua's detailed confession to police about what he had done played a major role in securing a conviction. The jury deliberated for just a few hours before returning a guilty verdict. In Florida, a conviction of first-degree murder typically carries a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for someone convicted as an adult. The judge, however, also had the option to consider mitigating factors due to Joshua's age, which could influence the length or type of his sentence. After deliberation, the judge sentenced Joshua Phillips to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This sentence meant that Joshua would spend the rest of his life behind bars with no chance of release, reflecting the seriousness of the crime he committed. The judge's ruling also sparked a debate about whether a 14-year-old should be tried as an adult for such a crime. Some argued that Joshua's youth and the circumstances surrounding the crime, such as his lack of a criminal history, should have been taken into account, while others felt that his actions were so severe that the severity of the punishment was justified. The case left a profound impact on the Jacksonville community, and especially on Maddie Clifton's family, who had to endure the shock of losing their daughter in such a violent way. The public's reaction to Joshua's conviction and sentencing was mixed, with some expressing sympathy for his young age, and others feeling that justice had been served for Maddie's brutal murder. Joshua's case also led to public discussions about juvenile crime, the treatment of minors in the justice system, and the question of whether young offenders should face adult charges for particularly heinous crimes. Some legal experts suggested that life sentences without the possibility of parole might not always be the best course for juvenile offenders, given their potential for rehabilitation. But in this case, the severity of Joshua's crime left little room for leniency. As of today, Joshua Phillips remains incarcerated, having spent over 2 decades in prison. His case remains a stark reminder of the potential for violence even among young people, and continues to be a topic of discussion in the context of juvenile justice. The case of Joshua Phillips is a tragic one. The brutal murder of Maddie Clifton and Joshua's chilling involvement in it shook the Jacksonville community and the nation. The court proceedings, including the jury's conviction and Joshua's life sentence, demonstrated how the justice system handled this complex and disturbing case. However, it also raised important questions about the way juvenile offenders are treated in the criminal justice system, especially when they commit crimes of such a horrific nature. Before we wrap up, I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you think Joshua Phillips' sentencing of life in prison without the possibility of parole was fair, considering his age and the brutal nature of the crime? Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe